We begin with renewed fears the Middle East is on the brink of a broader war. Palestinians are staging protests across the West Bank following the assassination of top Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. He was killed in an overnight strike in Iran's capital. This is footage of Haniyeh taken just yesterday. He was in Tehran for the swearing in of the new Iranian president. Iran is blaming Israel and promising retaliation. Israel has not confirmed or denied responsibility. That attack came just hours after another Iran-backed militant was killed. An Israeli strike in Lebanon's capital left a senior Hezbollah commander dead. Israel argues he was responsible for a rocket attack on Saturday that killed 12 children in the Golan Heights. All that escalation has prompted other nations to call for cooler heads. CBC's Ashley Burke joins us now for Washington. Ashley, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here as always. So what are U.S. officials saying about this and what it could mean for the region?
Well, Brett, the U.S. is urging restraint by all players in the Middle East after the assassination of political leader Ismail Haniyeh while visiting Tehran. Now, White House national spokesperson John Kirby gave a press briefing today saying that he's concerned about this escalating. Take a listen.
These reports over the last 48 hours certainly don't help with the temperature going down. I'm not going to be Pollyannish about it. We're obviously concerned about escalation. All of this adds to the complicated nature of what we're trying to get done. And what we're trying to get done is a ceasefire deal.
Now, Kirby said the U.S. wasn't involved, didn't have advanced warning about this assassination, and wouldn't even confirm the attack, but did say the death of a main negotiator will not make talks about that ceasefire potential deal any easier. He said it's going to complicate things now, and the assassination's really a blow for the U.S., which has been pushing hard for this deal. Kirby said that this afternoon he hasn't seen any indication yet that the process has been completely torpedoed, so he hasn't lost hope. Still has ground on the people on the ground there and around the table. Hamas said Haniyeh's death will not alter its goals at the table, but experts say it will hurt negotiations. Having one of those top negotiators now dead, someone who was reportedly pushing to reach a deal, that could raise some issues there. And now there are only hardline Hamas leaders that are going to be left around the table, experts say.
Well, not only are those ceasefire negotiations stalled, the big question on everyone's mind is what this could mean for war in the region. Ashley, what's the mood in Washington about whether this could escalate into an all-out regional war?
Yeah, the assassination adds to growing fear that Iran will strike back, threatening a full-out war. And Iran may not be the only country to retaliate. Observers say its proxies could step in to help launch a coordinated counterattack against Israel by employing not only its own missiles, rockets, and drones, but also militas in Iraq, Syria, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. Today, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, said Washington would come to Israel's defense if needed, if they needed to defend themselves. But also adding to the tension is there was this late TV appearance from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that Israel will exact a heavy price from any aggression against it, and warning that Israelis are going to have some challenging days that lie ahead.
All right, thank you, Ashley. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke in Washington. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was asked about the chances of a wider war in the Middle East. Here he is speaking from the Philippines today.
I don't think war is inevitable. I maintain that. I think there's always room and opportunities for diplomacy, and I'd like to see parties pursue those opportunities. If Israel is attacked, we certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again. But we don't want to see any of that happen. We're going to work hard to make sure that we're doing things to help take the temperature down.
For more on the international fallout of this, Dennis Horak previously served as Canada's ambassador to Saudi Arabia and was also previously the head of the Canadian mission in Iran. And Besma Momani is a political science professor at the University of Waterloo. She's also a senior fellow at the Center of International Governance and Innovation. I want to thank you both for joining me. Welcome to Power and Politics. Dennis, let me start with you. I want to get your reaction to Ismail Haniyeh's assassination and what it means for the region.
It's really not surprising overall. I mean, Israel has a long history of targeted assassinations. What is surprising is they were able to reach him in the center of Tehran. That's got to be worrying for the Iranians, for the intelligence failure and the security and defense failure that allowed the Israelis to get that deep into Iran. So that's going to be a concern. That's going to raise the temperature as well in Tehran, the pressure for some sort of response. But they're going to have to be wary about what happened, how this happened, and what the implications could be for an Israeli response to however Tehran responds to this. In a way, we're kind of where we were in April before the two sides exchanged direct blows, and we'll have to see. There's no guarantees either way.
Well, Besma, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not mention the killing or Iran, nor did the country's defense minister. Israel has not explicitly claimed responsibility for this, but as we just heard, has vowed to exact a heavy price from anyone who does strike at Israel. What do you make of Israel's response today?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's many who would doubt that Israel's behind the assassination. It's quite clear. They pretty much are the only ones that have a motive to take out Haniyeh. But I think what it demonstrates and what it says very loud and clear is that Netanyahu wants war. I don't think you can ignore that. It really is a very strong shot across the bow that is being perpetrated here by the Israelis. They want war. And I think the fact that this happened in the capital, Tehran, at the inauguration of the Iranian president is going to solicit a very, very heavy response. And I think, we may see similar in kind tit for tat. So some sort of assassination of the senior leader in Tel Aviv. I mean, it's really that extreme. You put the two together, both the taking out of the number 2 of Hezbollah and taking out Haniyeh in Tehran. It is very, very difficult for what they're self-described as the axis of resistance to not respond. It is very difficult for them to save face. So I think really, unfortunately, Israel has really brought on itself an absolutely devastating future war. And it is really hard to see how we're going to walk away from the abyss.
Well, Dennis, the United States is a key mediator in the efforts to reach a ceasefire and hostage release deal. What position does this assassination put the United States in now?
Well, I think it increases the pressure on them to try and work out some sort of ceasefire to the Gaza war, although I don't frankly think that solves the problem. This reflects what we've seen in Tehran and what we saw in Beirut the other day. It reflects an underlying tension between Iran and Israel, and that's not going to go away when and if the war ends in Gaza. But I think that's a good first step in terms of trying to lower the temperature in the region. The U.S. has signaled that they would support Israel if Israel was attacked, as they did in April. This attack may be a bit more complex because we may see proxy groups in Yemen, in Beirut, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, joining in the fight, which will make the response a lot more complicated than it was in April. So it's certainly moving things back to the edge. I'm not as pessimistic, I don't think, as Besma is. I think there's still opportunities to come back from the abyss here, and we'll have to see how the two sides respond to the coming events.
Well, on that question, Besma, how do you expect Tehran to respond to an assassination on its soil?
I mean, anything is possible. We have to be very blunt about this. No one knows. I think one indication might clarify things is when we see Hassan Nasrallah, who's giving a speech tomorrow. There might be some indication there, but it's really hard for these two groups to, again, save face by not reacting. They have to react. We were going to see some sort of reaction. I must say that generally, we had hoped that the Americans would try to push the party or pull the parties back. But it's hard to, on the one hand, you could argue that the Americans are completely missing in action, that they are completely sidetracked by what we see here. We certainly know that there's been a lot of really so-called tough conversations between Biden and Netanyahu. That's one interpretation that's often in the Western media and the American media in particular. But it's really hard to see how the Iranians are not going to interpret this as somehow a green light by the Americans, because Netanyahu just came back from Washington, just came back from from seeing all of the various congressional leaders, it's going to be really difficult for the Americans to argue that somehow they had nothing to do with or didn't okay this plan. It's really tough seeing that it's just coming on the heels of Netanyahu's return. So I think this is a really tough time for the region. And in all of these situations, assassinations like this don't change the underlying challenge. It doesn't change the reality. It's not going to mean the end of Hamas, and it's not going to mean the end of the IRGC or of Iran. So really, it is frankly a futile effort, but just invites more war, more violence, and usually it's civilians that end up paying the price on this. So this is really a devastating time for the entire region as things escalate.
And Dennis, how do you think the Iranian regime is going to respond to this? You referenced earlier there was a previous exchange in April where Iran launched roughly 300 drones and projectiles, and Iran responded with a strike on Isfahan deep in Iranian territory. So perhaps this is a little bit different. How do you expect them to respond this time?
It's an open question, really. They could respond in a similar fashion as they did in April. They could also work in coordination with their proxies, as I was saying before. They will need to respond in some way, shape, or form. How that will be, whether it's massive as they tried to do in April, or something a little bit more measured, we'll see. But the pressure will certainly be on to respond. But they will also have to be worried about what happened with this attack. How was Israel able to get that far into Iranian territory without being noticed? And what does that say about how Israel could respond to whatever Iran does? I don't think either side wants a war at this point. I don't think they've wanted one all along. But they keep inching up to the abyss, and missteps happen, as we apparently saw with what happened in the Golan Heights with the strike on the playground. Whether I don't believe that was a targeted strike on the playground. However, when you're firing missiles back and forth over a border for 9 months, things are going to get hit that perhaps aren't intended to be hit, and before you know it, we spiraled into something else. And maybe that's what happened in the Golan Heights, and what the response was in Beirut. So these sorts of, as we play on the edge of this abyss, missteps and mistakes could lead to untold consequences. And so the challenge for both sides is to be able to sort of make their points, but be able to step back as they did in April. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail. Others will intervene. Allies will intervene to sort of try and, again, dampen down the pressure. But Iran will have to respond in some measure. Well, how that will be remains to be seen.
On that note, Besma, this all comes a day after another strike in Lebanon targeting a Hezbollah commander. This was after the strike on the Golan Heights that Dennis mentioned. He says the risk is high for a miscalculation, even if the sides don't necessarily want war. How concerned are you about a miscalculation of some sort engulfing the region into a war of that sort?
Very much, but I would just qualify. I do think that Netanyahu does want war. I mean, in many ways, it's the only way that he can avoid his own prosecution and imprisonment because of the very deep corruption charges against him. We can't ignore that factor. We have, frankly, an arsonist in power who wants war. The longer this war continues, the more that he avoids a ceasefire, the longer he is likely to stay as prime minister of Israel. And that is extremely important to this argument and calculation. I don't think we can ignore it. The fact that we have been so close to a ceasefire many, many times, that we are on the brink of a ceasefire, and yet at the very last hour we see this happening, it speaks volume. It suggests to me that Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. Despite what he may say in rhetoric, there is no ceasefire that he will accept, because him and his cabinet, which are very much occupied by extreme right-wing members, are very much in it for the end. And the end is unfortunately just absolutely horrific.
But the counterpoint to that, Besma, is that the Netanyahu regime seems to have the full support of the U.S. He was just on a visit. And on that note, I mean, the U.S. had designated Haniyeh, quote, a specially designated global terrorist. So, Dennis, I'll turn to you for the last word. What do you make of Besma's point there?
It is a possibility, and certainly Netanyahu has not been overly supportive of efforts to try and get a ceasefire. I think there's blame to go on both sides, to be honest. I also think that what's happening in the northern border with Hezbollah and Israel is something that has should have nothing to do with the Gaza war, and it's a further escalation. And I think it's sort of been carried out a little bit on the quiet, but that adds to the tensions. And certainly we'll see where they go. I still believe that neither side wants an all-out war. I think they want to push the envelope. I think certainly Netanyahu wants to exhibit strength and wants to show that he's after taking down Hamas and the Hamas leadership for whatever political gains that can get him in Israel. So we'll see. But I still stick to the idea that I don't think they want an all-out war, because I think they understand it would be devastating. Even if they were to prevail, it would be devastating for Israel.
All right, different takes there. I want to thank you, Dennis Horak and Besma Momani, for joining me.